I would like to begin today with the traditional land acknowledgement, and we're so honored to acknowledge the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 region in southern Alberta, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy comprising the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina First Nation, the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, the Bearspaw, and the Wesley First Nations. The city of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3, and it is with profound gratitude that we share this space and that we're able to welcome you here today. This is Nickle at Noon, the online edition. As mentioned, the last one for the winter term. We bring you different talks, tours, performances. We haven't done a sing-along, but maybe every Thursday from 12 to 1. We'll be picking it up again in September, likely the second week of September, so you can maybe bookmark that. The full program details are, of course, posted to our website. We also post on your favorite social media platforms, and I would invite you to, to follow us, to like us, to subscribe to us, whatever you like. You're also welcome to subscribe to our mailing list. Just reach out to Marla or I, and we will happily add you. This is a really special day, and I would just like to inform you that this is the last giving day for winter term 2021. This is a fantastic initiative that the university has invited libraries and cultural resources to be part of. I think for the first time. This is certainly the first time that the Nickle has had its own button. And I'm so pleased to be able to share that. And as Marla mentioned earlier, all donations up to $2,500 will be matched by the university. And your gift really does take us further. So if you have even a small donation and are looking to support arts and culture at the university, we would have something really great to do with it. So I won't say anything more about that, but more information is certainly available. For this presentation, we would ask that you keep yourself on mute. We're going to hold the comments and questions until the end of the presentation. We've got lots of different speakers, so I think that that is the best thing to do. Please be aware that this presentation is being recorded, and it will eventually, within probably about 2 weeks, be added to the Nickle's YouTube channel. Marla should be posting the YouTube link if she hasn't done so already. Your names and the chat will not be included in the recording. However, if you speak, your voice will be there in the finished recording. So just keep that in mind. A few introductions. My name is Michelle Hardy. I'm a curator with Nickle Galleries, and I'm your host today. Marla Halstead is the front-end manager for the Nickle and is co-hosting this program. It is with her technical expertise that we are able to join you every Thursday lunchtime. Thank you, Marla. We'll be back again in September, but as I said, watch out for a few special presentations coming up over the summer. So today's presentation is Archives from Home, and it is hosted or coordinated by Christena McKillop. And Christena is going to introduce each of the 9 speakers. But just let me say just a couple things about Christena. She has not been at the University of Calgary for a very long time, but she's certainly made an impact. And I'll say that she's a wonderful colleague, and I always enjoy plotting and planning with Christena. She's the Learning and Outreach Engagement Librarian for Archives and Special Collections. She's also currently an interim Associate University Librarian and helping to forge, I know some really interesting policy and direction for the library. And it was Christena's initiative to bring together 9 of her colleagues to present some of the wonderful treasures that they've been working on in the archives through COVID.
Thank you very much, Michelle and Marla, for inviting your colleagues from Archives and Special Collections to be the grand finale of this year's Nickle at Noon series. We're just so pleased to be asked. As Michelle said, we have 9 presenters today, which is very exciting. Everything from recipes to rock and roll and everything in between. So what I'm going to do is I have a list of all my colleagues who are presenting in alphabetical order by first name. And we're just going to, I'll be the person behind the slides and I'll be advancing as best I can. There are a couple of slides where there will be a little bit of a delay. So we'll just take a little breath and then the slide will load. So not to have anyone worry about that. Just in the run through, I noticed a couple of slides are a little bit on the slow side to load. So without further ado, I am going to get started. As Michelle mentioned, what we're talking about today are items that we have either been working with, that we've come across, that some of our patrons have asked us about, because of course this past year, like no other, during the COVID pandemic, most of Archives and Special Collections have been spending their time at home working working on projects and reference questions and other activities. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the presentation over to Allison. And Allison, I'm going to advance to the first slide.
Great, thank you, Christina. I'd just like to say that one of the wonders of Zoom is that people we don't normally see at these are able to attend. So I want to say hi to my mom. Hi, Mom. Coming in from Lethbridge. This is where the tuition money all went. Okay, so one of the things that I learned this year that I did not know before was there was an event that took place at the University of Calgary in 1978 called the Conference on the Canadian Novel. This conference was held 4 days in February. It brought together authors, publishers, agents, academics, teachers, and readers, significantly the readers, in what is now the old Mac Hall Ballroom, was then just the Mac Hall Ballroom. For conference sessions, there was a book fair, there was a film festival, there was a public reception, and by all accounts was a very successful event, described as a brash effort by Kevin Peterson of the Calgary Herald, who later went on to become a publisher of the Calgary Herald. So how is it that I did not know about it, but I learned about it this year? And the answer is, as with many things in the archive, I learned it by accident, randomly while I was doing something else. So let's go back to last summer for that. Christina, could I have the next slide? Thank you. So last summer, I attended a Zoom presentation by Sean Hunter as part of Calgary, or the Historic Calgary Week in July. Sean is the author of Calgary Through the Eyes of Writers and the creator of the Literary Map of Calgary. Here's her book here. This was some of my pandemic reading this year. And Sean's presentation was on writers in 1920s Calgary. After the fact, I contacted her to say that I had enjoyed the presentation. I kind of knew her through the reading room here and through some other work that we'd done with them through Lougheed House. And she replied to say that she needed to confirm some information that she was going to put on the literary map, and we would probably do that, later when the dust settled. And I was like, the dust is never settling. I'm in the office once every other 2 weeks anyways, so let me know what you need and I'll go find it. Could I have the next slide, please? So Sean is looking to confirm an address for a Calgary novelist named Christine Vandermark, who worked in Calgary in the first part of the 20th century. And you can see we confirmed that she lived in Sonalta by a letter here that she wrote to her sister. So fast forward through to February 2021 and the official launch of the Literary Map of Calgary. There was an interview with Sean in the Calgary Herald in which she mentioned that she had just learned about a major literary event that had happened at the University of Calgary in 1978, and that was this Conference on the Canadian Novel. And I was intrigued by this because she said she had never heard of it, but I had never heard of it either, and I've been with the university for a while. So over the next few days, people that I knew, they forwarded me copies of the article when they had seen it, and they said, hey, is this you guys? And I was like, yeah, this is totally us, but I don't know anything about this conference. So in my mind, I put it aside, and it was a thing that I was going to look into later. Okay. So about a month later, while I was looking for something else in the W.O. Mitchell phone for a reference query, I quite by accident, stumbled across this image. And could I have the next slide, please? Oh, and the one after that. There we are. So it was the poster, the advertising poster from the Conference on the Canadian Novel. And so I immediately sent a copy to Sean and went, look what I found. And she wrote back and went, this is amazing. So this was sort of the key to find out more, because it listed so many names, and it listed the films in the film festival and the sponsors, all sorts of things. You can see here, the writing is very tiny, but you can see here a list of the authors we have represented in the archives, in special collections, so in the literary archives, who were in attendance at this in 1978. So I started to look through old issues of the Calgary Herald. Now, the Calgary Herald historical newspapers came available online this year through the Alberta Library, and it was invaluable in researching this. I found out that it was organized by Dr. Kenneth Glazier, who was the chief librarian at the time, and by Ernie Ingalls, who was the special collections librarian at the time. These were names familiar to me from our office files. So the brash effort here for this young university was to try to position itself as the center of Canadian literature in Canada. In 1978, the U of C really had only had autonomy from the U of A for 12 years. And special collections had only been around since 1971. And they really did start building their collections until 1973, when the Hugh McLennan Phone were acquired. 1974, Mordecai Richler, shortly after that, Alice Munro. And so this was thought of as a coming of age of the department of the library at the University of Calgary. Could I have the next slide, please? Thanks. So the centerpiece of this was a list that was released on the Saturday of the conference, the 100 most significant Canadian novels as chosen by conference attendees and academics and teachers across the country. It was described as the most divisive factor and the most concrete product of the event, also described as outrageous, not a good idea, and a plot by Jack McClelland to sell more books. Jack McClelland being the king of Canadian publishing at the time. The organizers put together a list of over 200 novels by over 100 Canadian authors and sent it out to 500 participants, academics, and teachers. They received 132 replies to it. And there were 58 authors named on the list, but 7 authors were responsible for 35 books on here. Eli Mandel, the critic, called it a genuinely Canadian document, unbalanced, anonymous, created by committee. But it served its purpose, which was to attract attention and get people talking, as you can see, because here we are talking about it over 40 years later. So to me, this raises a lot of questions that I would like to answer sometime. How did this affect our collection? Development in special collections. Apparently there was an NFB film that was going to be made about it. I'd like to find out if this ever actually happened. I'd like to see it if it did. And I think eventually I'd like to make some kind of exhibit that will go up someday when our reading room is open again. This is the thing that we will be able to show everyone, and it just kind of shows, you know, our departmental ancestry, I guess, here at the university. So, so that's it for that. I will pass it over to Christine from here. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now, this shouldn't be one of the ones that's taking time to load, but let's just see. Okay. Oh, yeah. All right, here we are. Christie, please.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. What I've decided to talk about is some recipe books. These are if you want to flip to the next slide, these are from the phone of Ernest and Anna Critchley. Anna was born in Illinois in 1884 and came to Alberta in 1904 with her father. Her mother passed away when Anna was a small child. Anna met Ernest in Olds, Alberta. Ernest was working for a lumber company, and Ernest went on to manage the Crown Lumber Company here in Calgary. Coincidentally, the Glenbow Archives has the phone of the Crown Lumber Company, as well as the Critchley phone. And also Glenbow has the collection of the American Women's Club, Calgary office, and Anna was a charter member and president of the American Women's Club Calgary. And this women's club had a domestic service department where they would offer cooking lessons and little tidbits on how to keep a happy home. So what I wanted to look at was one of the cookbooks, which was put out by the American Women's Club Calgary in 1928. You can flip to the next slide. And this cookbook was called the Bluebird Cookbook. It was published in 1926. And it was, I believe, the second publication of this. The original, I believe, came out in 1924. And it is just such a treat. And the one reason why I chose it wasn't just because it was an old cookbook. It's the fact that Mrs. Critchley annotated so much of it. She wrote in every spare section of this book. All throughout the pages, she would write down where she thought the good recipes were. Multiple times, actually, I saw the same recipe name and page number all over. And so with that, I was just fascinated. She even included extra pages in the middle of the book with handwritten recipes in it. So this was a very well-loved and well-used cookbook by Mrs. Critchley. So I thought one of the things that we I think all have been doing during COVID is doing more home cooking from home, trying to find new recipes, trying to just get out of kind of your rut of normal cooking. And I thought, what a better way than to explore some new recipes. And I did that by cooking some of Mrs. Critchley's notations and some of the recipes from this book. So you can flip to the next slide. This was the results of Sunday's cooking. And these are all recipes from the American, the Bluebird Cookbook, with the exception of the middle slide. The middle in the thing there was Jell-O, which I made for my daughter because I knew she wouldn't eat anything else that I prepared. However, so the first thing that I prepared were beef rolls, a wonderful recipe, apparently really good, according to Critchley. And with that was, you basically took some steak, rolled it up, and then cooked it in gravy. It was quite good. Another recipe that was noted was potatoes au gratin. And again, a nice potato recipe, sliced them thin, made a rich cream, which I had to Google how to make a rich cream in order to figure this out. But anyway, very highly, it was very tasty. It was a great recipe. So that was my second dish. Next one was a carrot ring. Now, the carrot ring was part of this section in the middle of the book that Mrs. Critchley hand wrote some of her items. And I wanted to try this because it was one of the ones she hand wrote. However, if you can tell from the picture on the right, it didn't quite turn out. The poor thing is to be put in a mold, cooked, and when I went to slide it out of the mold, it completely collapsed on me, but it was still really tasty. So it was a great recipe, even if it didn't look the greatest. So the next one is a cabbage salad. So good and easy to make. This one was had a notation throughout the cookbook about 4 or 5 times by Mrs. Critchley that she really, really liked it. So I made it. It was to be made with a mayonnaise salad dressing, which the recipe is on the right-hand side there. A really simple, great coleslaw. It needed maybe a few extra spices, but considering it's 1926, the sprinkle of paprika was really the most spice almost that you got in this recipe, and it was pretty much as predicted. So that was the salad. And then the final thing was one of Mrs. Critchley's recipes that she submitted to the cookbook. And this one was fun on all levels. It was called the Second Prize Kiwanis Cake. This cake, what you see there is at the top there, the recipe is all the information she gives. There is no preparation, doesn't tell you what pan you're supposed to use, doesn't tell you what temperature, how long to cook the cake. It it doesn't, basically you should already know how to make this cake, apparently. So I made it in 2 round pans, and in retrospect, it should have gone into a bundt pan. This is what I realized afterwards. Considering the frosting was really soft and just kind of flowed over, should have gone into a bundt pan. However, it was extremely tasty, and I was just really proud of just this really neat recipe and all the recipes in here. One of the things I'll make a really quick note about is that the recipe calls for a 1/4 cake of chocolate, which I never did figure out what the proper measurement was for it. I used 2 ounces of chocolate, figuring it might have been a 1/4 of a package of what we would get today. But it was truly an experience, and it was something that was just so much fun to try to use an archival collection in real life as we're cooking from home. Thank you.
Thank you, Christie. Super fun. All right, I'm going to advance here. Oh, all right, and this is going to be over to Christine, Leonard-Cripps. And Christine, I'm sorry if I've skipped one slide. I apologize. Is it okay if you jump in here?
Sure, no problem. Well, good afternoon. My name is Christine Leonard-Cripps, and I'm an archive specialist with the Archival Processing Unit here at the University of Calgary. And I'm here today to talk to you about one of the individuals whose work is represented in our Special Collections archives, Mrs. Marjorie Rice. Next slide, please, Christina. Born Marjorie Juke in St. Petersburg, Florida in 1923, Marjorie Rice was inspired to explore geometric tessellations after reading about the work of mathematician Martin Gardner in an issue of Scientific American magazine. Although her formal education ended when she graduated from high school at 16 years old, the housewife and mother of 5 began devoting her free time to experimenting with pentagon tilings at her kitchen table. Next slide, please. Here we have some examples of tiling and tessellation. Essentially, tiling or plane filling is the arrangement of geometric shapes across a 2-dimensional field. The periodic repetition of polygon tiling shapes across a plane is called a tessellation. And there are at least 15 known classes of convex pentagonal tilings. Next slide, please. Using her own calculations, Marjorie Rice sketched out never-before-seen patterns and used her own notation style to describe the constraints on and relationships between the sides and angles of polygons. By 1977, Rice had identified 4 new types of tessellating pentagons and over 60 distinct tessellations. Here we see sketches of the butterfly tessellation she developed, aka Class 13. The University of Calgary's archives includes many hand-rendered examples of her geometric investigations. Much like famed Dutch graphic artist M.C. Escher, Rice was curious about the different ways in which these repeating patterns could populate a 2-dimensional plane. Rendered here in full color, we can see how Rice's Escher-esque designs associate the individual tiles with recognizable natural motifs, including butterflies, shells, and fish. Some of her other themes included roses and leaves, bees and clover, and hibiscus blossoms. This approach made the typically very challenging to execute geometric techniques demonstrated seem more achievable to students and math hobbyists alike. Variations on these models have been applied to fields as diverse as crystallography, virology, art, philosophy, and quilting. Although Marjorie always said she was more of a jigsaw person. Next slide, please. Interlocking shells and fish rendered in the Class 2 type pattern are examples of Marjorie's colorful tiling tessellations. Her work was examined by respected University of Pennsylvania mathematics professor Doris Schatzschneider, who deciphered Rice's quote unquote crude but correct notation and formally announced her very real discoveries to the mathematics community. Rice went on to publish several articles and essays on geometry and has been recognized by the Mathematics Association of America for her work. Canadians will note that she was interviewed about her discoveries on David Suzuki's Nature of Things in 1996. As noted, the remaining 2 classes of an estimated possible 15 types of pentagon tessellations were not discovered until 1985 and 2015, with the final class being revealed at long last with the aid of a rather robust computing program. Mrs. Rice passed away in San Diego in 2017 at the age of 94, but her legacy lives on. Here we have a photo of a ceramic mosaic created from one of Rice's beautiful tiling patterns, which can be seen at the Mathematical Center at Hunter College in New York today. And the records from her archives at the University of Calgary now form part of the Stren's Recreational Mathematical Collection. Final slide, please. Thank you very much for attending my talk on amateur mathematician Marjorie Rice. You can find out more about her and her remarkable discoveries through our institution's website listed here. Thanks so much.
Thanks very much, Christine. Curtis Frederick, over to you.
Hi, my name is Curtis Frederick, and I'm the University Records Archivist. I oversee the records created by and about the university, as well as professorial papers and records. And today, for my short presentation, I'll talk about an issue that all of our repositories, not just the University Archives, have been facing over the past year, and that is providing reference services at a distance. Next slide, please. Specifically, I'll be speaking about providing reference services for the researchers and writers of the book Creating the Future of Health, which is a history of the coming School of Medicine here at the University of Calgary. Prior to COVID, my colleagues and I had worked with the researchers, and they had done a lot of work with the records in our reading room, doing a lot of research and getting the information they needed. However, once COVID hit, they were at the stage of selecting photographs for inclusion in the book, and I needed to devise a way to do this via distance as they were on a tight timeline. The archives hold thousands, if not tens of thousands of photographs related to the university and its buildings, professors, and university events. We are fortunate in that we have a relatively in-depth description of the photographs so they can be searched through our online database. However, one challenge is that many of the descriptions end at the folder level and not at the individual item level. So we might have a description that says such and such a building or such and such a professor, or 20 or more in a single folder, each with a slightly different poser at a slightly
Curtis, I think we've lost you.
Am I back now?
Yep, you're back.
Alrighty, so I'm not quite sure where I left off, but if you go to the next slide, Christina, thank you. So an additional challenge of providing reference service from a distance is that many of the folders contain negatives, as you can see on this slide, or contact sheets, as you can see on the next slide. And very few of the photographs have been digitized. So in normal times, we would have the researcher come into the reading room, provide them with the files, and they would set up a light box to be able to view those negatives. And they would select which photographs they wanted, and we would send them to the digitization unit to create high-res images suitable for printing. Obviously, with COVID, that wasn't possible in this case. After discussions with the researchers, they empowered me to make photo selections if there were only 1 or 2 photographs in the file, or if there was an obvious best photograph. However, situations like you can see here, they needed to actually see these different views to be able to pick which photograph they wanted in their book. And for these remainder, I needed to scan and send the contents of the folder to the researcher. For the contact sheets like this was relatively easy, just using our flatbed scanner to scan and send. But for negatives, it was a bit more difficult as the flatbed scanner doesn't work well for those. For that, I needed to set up a light box and took photos of the negatives, but this produced a lot of glare, and eventually settled on using a program called Google Scan, which took multiple photographs and combined them into one to be able to reduce the glare. Once the negatives and contact sheets had been scanned and sent to the researcher, they were able to say, I want the photo from this column, or numbered in this case, and I organized all of these requests and sent them off to the digitization unit. Next slide, please. The digitization unit created high-resolution scans suitable for printing. As you can see here, this is a photograph of the construction of the medical center for the School of Medicine at the Foothills Hospital, and this was taken in February of 1971, and you can see how different it looks from today. Overall, it took a few weeks of back and forth with the researcher to select the images, especially as I was only working in the office 1 or 2 days a week. But in the end, we selected more than 60 images that formed a core part of the visual narrative of the book. It was also a lot more work on my part and a lot more hands-on work than would be normal for requests of this nature due to the amount of scanning that I had to do and to the multiple contact points. I'm pleased to say that the book was published in February of this year and is available through University of Calgary Press. In addition to meeting the needs of the researcher, the project also proved good for my own personal growth. As I started just a week before COVID hit, it gave me a great opportunity to delve into our photo collection and learn what we have in the collection. I also found a number of fun photographs that didn't make it into the book, including these 2 here you can see. From the, I believe these were photographs of staff who were absent on the day the photographer came around for staff photos. So they set up these skeletons to pose for them instead. So thanks for listening to my presentation, and I'll pass it back to Christina.
Okay, thank you very much, Curtis. All right, and David Daley.
Hello, everyone. Today I'll be featuring some postcards that have recently arrived on campus and are now part of the Glenbow Western Research Center. Postcards are fun to research, and I strongly encourage you to dive into the postcard collections of the Glenbow Western Research Center and the University of Calgary Archives and Special Collections. Next slide, please. Let's take a fast little tour. This photo postcard from about 1908 is from the Skelton Family Archive. It's a studio portrait showing 3 men in a painted automobile set, and it works in the same way as phone apps do now to change our appearance and add things to an image. The more things change, the more things stay the same. Next slide, please. This is a multi-view chromolithograph, or chrome, of buildings on the University of Calgary campus. Of the 4 buildings shown, all are still standing except the library building on the top left. This is an ad card for an agricultural conference held on the university campus in June 1974. Dates recorded in the captions, messages, and postmarks often add to the research value of a postcard. Next slide, please. This photo card is from between 1926 to the 1940s, as indicated by the type of blank paper postcard paper used. The caption, the truncated caption reads, Indian Potlatch, Hart Bay, British Columbia. A potlatch is a gift-giving feast of the people of the Pacific Northwest coast. It involves giving away or destroying wealth or valuables and is focused on the reaffirmation of family and friendships and the human connection with the spirit world. Here we see sewing machines, dressers, and storage trunks sitting out in front of longhouses. The postcard shows the intersection of Indigenous and Western cultures. The longhouses are of native design, but the building materials used were manufactured using Western methods. The dress of the First Nations people in the image are also a blend of Western and native styles, with pants and shirts worn along with blankets and woven grass hats. In the front of the houses stand a version of the British Union Jack flag flying adjacent to a painted native totem pole. This 3.5 by 5.5 inch postcard is a highly detailed image containing lots of information. Postcard images like this are visual documents of the people, customs, and places of the past. They can be used to inform us of the similarities and differences between current and previous cultural activities. Next slide, please. This is a chrome postcard of the Fairview Lanes Bowling Alley in Calgary's North Hill Shopping Centre. The rich style of early 1960s decor is loud and clear in this scalloped-edged marvel of the postcard photographer's craft. This advertising cards boast the bowling alley's 48 5-pin lanes, a billiard saloon, and 2,200 square feet of the most modern nursery facilities. Apparently, childcare was an issue for leisure time as well as working Calgarians. The back of the card offers a free open bowling game if the card is returned non-mutilated. Next slide, please. There's also a poem which reads, "There's fun for all. You'll have a ball. Join a league today to pave the way. Good idea for husbands and wives, and also for the gals and guys. Openings now for 7 and 9. Pick up your phone and give us your time." I'll bet you didn't think you'd be hearing bowling poetry today. This card impressively gathers art, photography, interior design, poetry, bowling, and commercial advertising into one unique historic record. Next slide, please. As we've seen with the studio portrait shown earlier, not all postcards are view cards of places. Many postcards fall into the topical category, which includes holiday greetings, vocational images, weddings, outings, or artists' drawings, earlier versions of what we today know as graphic design. This novelty photo card was made for sale in Tobermory in Northern Ontario. This photo montage of images is known as an exaggeration card. Here we see men battling gigantic fish on a river fishing trip. An illustrator has taken existing photos and edited them in their actual Photoshop to create a fake image intended to mislead and amuse. Exaggeration cards are precursors to the electronic deep fakes we need to be wary of in the coming years. Even as novelty items, postcards can teach us a thing or two. I encourage you to explore the collections at the University of Calgary. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. There's some information there. And next, I'd like to turn the presentation over to David Jones.
Hello, everybody. I'm David Jones. I am project archivist for the EMI Music Canada Fund here at University of Calgary. I'm going to talk about a digital audio tape, something that's kind of cool to me and some of my friends, but might be of interest to any archivist or librarian who was once a teenage misfit. So next slide, please. So on the right there is the tiny cassette. It's the original production master for a 1991 album called Last Rites by the band Skinny Puppy. It's an important piece of music history as it's the record of an album created by one of Canada's most influential and innovative bands at the height of their popularity and creativity, which never saw the light of day in its original intended form due to the removal of one of the songs due to a copyright infringement notice. Next slide, please. So Skinny Puppy were formed in 1982 in Vancouver, and they were one of the first acts signed to the Vancouver-based label Network. In 1986, Network scored a distribution deal with EMI Music Canada, and this is why we have a lot of Skinny Puppy and Network items in our archive. We have internal memos, correspondence, promotional photographs, press kits, contracts, and assortment of audiovisual items like tape reels, audio tapes, broadcasts, cassettes, CDs, and more from this band. In 1991, the band recorded what was at the time expected to be their final album. This was following many years of internal conflict and snowballing rumors that the band would be breaking up. The title of the album, Last Rites, was originally spelled as we see it on the DAT master, Last Rites with R-I-T-E-S, and it was ominously hinting at the impending death of the band. Next slide, please. The album has seen dozens of domestic and international repressings over the 3 decades since its debut. There are new pressings as recent as 2020 on vinyl record. However, there's no legal version of Last Rites that includes what was originally supposed to be the 10th track on the album. When the CD went into production, it was indexed with track 10 having no time duration, but programmed with a 2-second pre-gap, which is a period of time that the CD player is instructed to play silence. Since the album was originally mixed to have each song bleed into the next, this small portion of silence actually created somewhat of an exaggeration. As we see here, the track listing on the final product just omits track 10. Similarly, on the liner notes or record sleeves, the tracks read from 8 to 11, and some pressings contain the text track 10 ? Hidden somewhere in the liner notes. And this contributed to a lot of mystique over this lost and mysterious song. Next slide, please. So the missing song is called Left Hand Shake. On the right here is the form that was submitted to Bernie Grundman to master the tape. And we can see the original sort of working names of the songs on the album, and then the final finished final names. Track 10 was originally, I guess, called Wreck, and then it was called Left Hand Shake. And the reason why it was stripped from the album is because it contains a sample from Timothy Leary in which he recites the phrase "last rites denied," and this happens over and over. Initially, the band had got permission from Dr. Leary to use this in person. They told him, or he told them, the band, it was fine, but the copyright holder of the actual recording said that under no circumstances were they to use the sample. So this happened kind of at the last minute. Once the album was mastered, they had to take the album off right before, or sorry, take track 10 off right before the final release of the album. So the band felt that the song was not complete without the sample, and the label had no choice but to alter the album and remove the track. The phrase "last rites denied," which had given the album its name, now came to encompass the rights clearance issue that hampered the final release. And the album was released as Last Rites, spelt with a G and an H, a bit of a pun on copyright rights. Next slide, please. So the band members have talked of their disappointment that the track never made it to the final release. It was intended as a dramatic apex of an intense and emotionally charged album, which the band had approached the recording of thinking it would be their last. The Ghost track, which over the years just became known as track 10, earned a mythical status among the fan base, already known for its obsessive and insatiable thirst for rarities, remixes, demos, oddities, and remasters from the band. And to this day, there's almost no different version, remix, alternate demo that hasn't been released of any song from the archive of Skinny Puppy, except this one. However, in the 2000s, several versions were leaked and people could download them from file sharing platforms like Napster, and you could sort of make your own version of the album. When Skinny Puppy reformed in 2000, in Germany, they had a re-release show, and they mysteriously circulated 1,000 copies of what the picture on the left is the cover art for a CD just called Track 10. And this is the closest you can get to getting this as an official copy. Because it was released in Germany, maybe there was something that they could get around the copyright issue was. It had nothing to do with EMI Music Canada, so perhaps there was something there that allowed them to do this. Nonetheless, there's really no way to hear the album in its entirety as it was originally intended all the way through than with these DAT master tapes. And I got to do that when I first started working on the collections here, and it was a pretty cool experience to hear the album that way. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, David. I'm going to turn the presentation over now to Jason Nisenson. Jason.
Great. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay, good. So thank you. My name is Jason. I am the archivist at the Military Museums, Library and Archives. And the item I've selected is a piece from the James Reed phones, which was processed into our archives last fall. So when World War I broke out, James Reed was a relatively recent Scottish immigrant. He enlisted with the Canadian Expeditionary Force in Calgary early in 1915. And he served through to the end of the war with the 50th Battalion. And what you see here is a screenshot of the description of his material as it sits in the University of Calgary's archival repository. And that is him on the right, sitting beside his brother John, who was partner to James during most of his life's adventures. As a member of the 50th Battalion, he fought in the trenches at some of the more famous battles of World War I with resonant names that you would recognize, like the Battle of the Somme, Vimy Ridge, and Passchendaele, which is interesting for sure, but it's not his involvement in these battles that made him stand out for me when I was making my selection for today's short talk. So what's present in the James Reed phones that distinguishes it from many of the other small collections we have here at TMM is the documentation it contains that paints a picture not just of his time during war, but of the time leading up to that. What is so often missing in collections like these, and what is present in James Reed's material, is a description in text and photography of what drew Reed to Canada in the first place, and what life was like for him as a new immigrant in the years leading up to the war. Next slide, please, Christina. James Reed's World War I material, as received, also included an old envelope, presumably hand-titled by him as Lumber Camp Days, which consisted of this diary and a small amount of original photography. The diary describes Reed's experience working and looking for work in Western Canada and the Southwestern United States for the first 8 months of 1908. His writing and his descriptions are terse, but he paints a good picture of the community of men who at this time roamed the North American Northwest, cutting down the trees, digging in quarries, and hauling and loading various types of resource cargo down to the rivers and the train yards. And next slide, please. The hardships of the work and the absence of protection for the workers are well told. Reed's reports suggest that he makes $2 a day on average, which if you adjust for inflation is $25 a day only. The owners of the companies provide very little for their workers by way of creature comforts or safety. You really fended for yourself in these places, and 4 men, for example, are killed while building a rail line to cross the Battle River near Hardisty. Reed himself is badly injured, topping a tree, and at one point, a laborer, so hungry, he digs up and eats a root which turns out to be poisonous, and he dies. Reed also describes wading through hot ashes as logging work continued right through the burn of a major forest fire. Next slide, please. His experiences between work are just as interesting as his experiences at work sites. In the 8 months covered, Reed starts working in the Elk Valley, which is near Hosmer, BC, and then by foot and rail to sites in Washington, Montana, California, Seattle, Victoria, Calgary, Hardisty, Golden, and Invermere. He sleeps in ditches and abandoned shacks and describes the way in which these roaming parties of itinerants are ghettoized by nationality and length of time spent in Canada. Of a piece with the open racism of the day, Reed is resentful of employed Chinese and East Indian men in particular. Next slide, please. Despite his chronic unemployment and bouts of sickness, at one point he claims to have smallpox. I'm not sure if he really had smallpox. Reed sends money to his family back in Scotland. He also manages between 1908 and 1915 to save enough to purchase a house for himself and his mother in Calgary. He remained here working as a government building caretaker. He never married, and he died in 1970. And the material I've shown you today was kept by his niece, his brother John's daughter, and it was transferred to the library in September. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jason, for sharing that with us today. Oh, I'm sorry, I missed, well, okay, that's great. Thank you. Kim, can you take us through your slides, please?
Yes, can everyone hear me? Yeah, perfect. So today I wanted to talk about the women's section in the Farm and Ranch Review. If you want to just go over to the next slide, Christina. So I was able to dig into this section after we were contacted by a patron whose mother actually wrote one of these sections for a period of time, and they were just so fascinating. So for those who don't know, the Farm and Ranch Review was started in February of 1905 in Calgary. It was the only agricultural paper printed in Canada between Winnipeg and the Pacific Coast. And it was devoted to grain growing, stock raising, poultry, dairying, beekeeping, gardening, forestry, irrigation, organized agriculture, and the household. So just about everything. Its primary purpose was to be an independent voice for the farm and ranching community. And when at the time the publication started, Alberta was not yet a province. It was really coming into its own, but it really strongly noted that the men representing them in government really didn't understand the needs of the community. And they just wanted to make a way to create a new level of awareness of what was happening, but also to provide new information, tips into the community. And it really functioned like a bulletin board. The editors would go and read articles and go visit other ranches around Canada, and they would write about their findings in this paper. And from the very beginning, there was always these women's sections, and these women would get to share their personal experiences and their tips on all household things. There's recipes for how to make a paste to glue your china back together. And there's all sorts of things like that you can find. There's also good stories just about heroes in the community. There's a story in November 1905 about Lucia Mcgregor, who was kidnapped out of Fort Calgary. She was the daughter of one of the commanders. And these guys were about to invade the fort, and she escapes. She comes back and she tells everybody about what's happening, and the attack is stopped, and it's immediately followed by a recipe for Christmas cake. So I think that really showcases what this was. And so then as it goes on, it really showcases the work that women were doing. We get into the Depression. There's a lot of recipes about how to stretch food. And then into the war, how they have competitions about how to make sugarless preserves. And then as we keep going into the 60s, there's some really horrifying Jell-O mold recipes. So for people who are interested in that, I think it's a good place to look. The pages change their titles many times, but it's always near the back, just for those women to come together as a community. A lot of women would write into each other, and they would say, these are the problems I'm having, and other women would say, I'm having these problems too, with the hints from each other. And they would just kind of start a community, and people were saying how isolated they felt before this and how this is really a place to join together. So I think there's one more slide, but I just wanted to point out how strong a character, like these women coming together for everything you could possibly need for any era of ranching community. There is a tip or advice for you for anything that you might want. And it's such an excellent resource for anyone studying the ranching life of women in any period of time. So it ran from 1905 until 1966, when it was absorbed into the Family Herald, which was a national farming magazine. But I definitely think that it's a great treasure. And we do have a full run in the collection if anyone wants to come check it out. And that's it.
Thank you very much, Kim, for sharing that with us today. Super interesting. And now for our final speaker, we have Robb Gilbert. Robb, take it away.
Richard Hunter Font is
oh, darn.
a recent addition to the Canadian Architectural Archives. The font contains approximately 350 drawings, 60 photographs, and 1 box of textual files. The records largely date from the second half of the 20th century. Richard Hunter is a relatively little-known American-Canadian architect. He was born and raised in Arizona and graduated with a Bachelor of Architecture from the University of Oklahoma. He established his architectural practice in California, then Alaska, before finally moving to Victoria, BC in 1968, where he continues to reside today. Richard Hunter recently turned 90, and he continues to practice architecture. He mentioned to me that he has a potential project in Baffin Island, and he still continues to work on his own residence in Victoria, which he has worked on for over 50 years. His private practice largely focused on residential projects located in Victoria and the Pacific Coast area. I wanted to share a couple images of the archive's 300 drawings, as to my mind, they are a pleasure to view, displaying an amazing degree of creativity and imagination. One root of the creativity comes from Hunter's major architectural influences: the organic architecture of Frank Lloyd Wright and Bruce Goff, Hunter's mentor at the University of Oklahoma, as well as the German expressionist architect, Erich Mendelsohn. Slide, please. Erich Mendelsohn visited the University of Oklahoma in 1953, and Hunter was chosen to serve as a guide about town for Mendelsohn and his wife. From this meeting and another visit in San Francisco, Hunter developed a friendship with Mendelsohn that lasted until his death 6 months later. Hunter remained lifelong friends with Louise Mendelsohn and collaborated with her on a publication of a portfolio of Mendelssohn's early expressionist sketches, work that had a profound impact on Hunter. A copy of this rare portfolio is held in the phone. Hunter told me that he produced the 500 editions of this portfolio using the US Army printing press at Presidio in San Francisco on off hours when he could call on his friends in the printing office and wouldn't be detected by his superiors. Slide, please. His other major influence, organic architecture, is marked by design that integrates with the natural environment of the site. It should, in a way, grow out of the site. Think of Frank Lloyd Wright's Falling Water. The character of organic design is further marked by an integration throughout the building in the form of motifs, furniture, and materials, where the building becomes, in a sense, an organic whole. The Hunter collection includes several print copies of drawings by Bruce Goff. The project, I had a slide, but next slide. Here follows in the slides 2 examples of Hunter's drawings for the project's Killam House. The previous slide was the floor plan, and Hunter House, this slide. Killam House is an unbuilt project intended for the Killam family in Victoria. The previous slide was a preliminary floor plan from 1994. And the first slide in the presentation was a presentation drawing for the project, a large hand-covered colored print. And this slide is the Hunter House, Hunter's own residence outside Victoria. This is a presentation drawing from 1990. The drawing reflects the additions to the house or cottage he originally began in 1968. Most prominent among the additions is the tower, which he drew from Victoria's regional vernacular of colonial style circular corner towers. Hunter viewed this feature as a trademark of Victoria architecture. Top of the tower is a guest room with an elevated view of the surrounding landscape, an eagle's nest in Hunter's vision for the space. Mendelssohn's most well-known structure, Einstein Tower, a sketch of which was shown earlier, along with Goff's frequent use of towers in his design, perhaps also has an influence here. Among the characteristics of Hunter's drawings that can be found throughout the phone is his use of idiosyncratic floor plans, an organic integration of the building and the site, and a uniquely creative approach to design. I encourage you to visit the CAA and explore this phone further. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Rob. That concludes our speakers. Oh my gosh, Jason, there's that picture I was looking for. The joys of technology. So thank you, Michelle and Marla. I'll turn it back over to you and stop sharing my screen. So if we have time for a few questions, I'll let you guys decide that. All right, thank you.
Thank you so much. That was just wonderful. And, you know, what a monumental occasion to have so many talented archivists and people working with archivists in the same spot, kind of, all at the same time. So Marla has opened up the chat, but if there are any brave souls who would like to unmute and ask a question of any or all of the speakers, this is your moment. And yeah, I realize it's after 1, but we'll just hang on another few minutes. And this is your.
Sure, I have a question, if that's all
right.
right.
Thank you, Dick. Go right ahead.
Hey, not at all. Yeah, question for David Jones. Love the Skinny Puppy story. It was implicit, perhaps I missed it if it was explicit. The missing track number 10, the original Last Rites, is that on the DAT tape that you showed, and have you listened to it?
Yes. So yeah, the original, so that tape was the first production master.
Yeah.
It has all the original tracks. And I did listen to it. I listened to the migrated copy, which is very, very high quality. So it was really cool to spend, you know, it's a good long album, to spend an hour listening to something that I listened to in my teenage years, probably hundreds of times in this way. So yeah, but you can't actually get that anywhere, at least.
unless we book and listen and come in real time.
Until the digital asset management system is up and running, and anyone interested in Canadian and West Coast industrial music and critical albums of that era can listen to it now.
Yeah, that's great. Fabulous. Thanks very much.
No
I
problem.
honestly haven't thought of Skinny Puppy in like 20 years, 30, 40 years.
Yeah.
What a blast from the past. Thank you, Dick. Any other questions? Oh, someone, thank you. Christina's just commented that Kevin K, or I don't know if it's K or Key, has a brand new album out. Well,
He does, and it is another album that's had two titles. It was originally named after the indigenous land where Stanley Park sits in Vancouver, called Shwe Shwe. I'm not exactly sure how to pronounce it, but after some responses from indigenous people, he renamed the album Resonance to sort of reflect that he's a white man, you know, using this name. So yeah, I hear it's really good. I've heard a couple tracks, so thanks, Christine.
so something to check out this weekend.
Mhm.
I had a comment for David Daley. David, well, enjoyed all the presentations, but I was really interested in the postcard that you showed, given that it's supposed to be of a potlatch. What was the date on the postcard?
Thanks for asking, Michelle. There's a range for the date on that postcard, and it's from 1926 to the 1940s. That kind of postcard blank was being used. So anywhere within that date range.
That's really interesting because officially potlatch was still banned.
Wow.
Yeah, till 1951. So something interesting's going on there.
Well, then that would add to, I think, the scarcity and importance of the card too. If someone has photo documented something that wasn't sanctioned, then yeah, pretty interesting card.
And
Thank
no,
you
I
for
didn't
that.
have that date memorized. I had to Google it while you're-
Good comment. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I'm not seeing anything else, but I want to thank each of you. You are just, you know, really wonderful colleagues, and the research that you've been doing hidden away at home is clearly so important. What tremendous resources we are sitting on. And, you know, I always feel so privileged to be a member of this university and work with terrific people and have access to really amazing things. So I look forward to providing other opportunities to share these resources. I hope that you all stay well over the summer. I hope that we can do this again, Christina. Nickle at Noon, we're always looking for something.
Thank
you. If anybody would like to reach out and reach any of the people that spoke today, you're welcome to connect with me or connect with Marla or Christina, and we can direct you if you had a question. And I'll just remind you once again that Nickle at Noon finishes now for the summer. Michelle's really happy, yay! But we'll be back again in September, and we've got some great things percolating along, and look forward to welcoming you all back. So without further ado, the edited version of the video will be posted within the next week or so. So you can look for it there.
Great.
Okay. Thank you all so much. Kudos, stay well, and we'll see you in September.